He did not come to the Osterman for the food, he came to sign. 3 nights before, a deal that would put a German name on his rail yards. A waitress leaned across Renzo Falcieri's table to clear a plate and said 4 words that were not hers to say. She was out of the building in under a minute. What he learned when he went looking for her did not just end the deal. It ended the man who had spoken for him for 11 years. The private room at the Ostermann had no windows, and Renzo Falcieri had chosen it for that reason. He sat at the head of a table built for 12, with 9 people at it, and he had not touched his glass. The room smelled of butter, and cut lilies, and old carpet. Behind the east wall, a service lift ran up and down, and the sound came through the plaster every few minutes, like something breathing inside the building. He liked it. It reminded him that no room was ever as sealed as the men sitting in it believed. Across from him, Berthold Krantz was explaining freight. Krantz was a narrow man in his 60s, with clean hands and a voice built for reading contracts aloud. He spoke in German, always in German, and he spoke slowly as a courtesy, and every third sentence he paused and opened his palm toward the man on his left, and the man on his left turned it into English. That man was Konrad Vollmer. Vollmer had stood at Renzo's shoulder for 11 years, and at his father's shoulder for 9 years before that. He had a soft, unhurried delivery, and a talent for making hard terms sound reasonable. In 20 years, he had never once raised his voice in a room. He was not muscle, and he was not family. And that was precisely why he had lasted. Every serious thing that had ever been said to the Falcieri name in another language had passed through Konrad Vollmer's mouth first. Renzo did not speak German. He had decided, at 20, that he would not spend the years that he would buy the language instead, the way he bought lawyers and dock time, and the silence of small officials. It had seemed like efficiency at the time. It had never once seemed like a door left standing open in a wall he had otherwise built very carefully. He says, "The rolling stock is yours on paper from the first day," Vollmer said. The maintenance obligation moves to his side after the 2nd year. He calls it generous. He is not wrong. Renzo nodded once. Down the table his sister was watching him nod. Rosalba Falcieri had built this deal over 14 months. Alone, without a single meeting he had needed to attend. She had a lawyer's mind, and no patience left for the parts of the business that still required a man to stand out in the rain. 4 weeks ago, in this room, she had told him that the yards were dying. That freight, without a European license, was only a warehouse with rails on it, and that she had found the last door still open in a very long corridor. She had also told him what it would cost. Krantz would not sign into a family he could not hold. There had to be a rope between the 2 houses. The rope was sitting 2 seats down, eating almost nothing. Ulte Kranz was 30, composed, and entirely uninterested in pretending otherwise. She had shaken his hand in the corridor an hour earlier and said, in careful English, that she hoped they might be practical with one another. He had liked her for it. There was nothing cruel in the arrangement, and nothing warm in it either. In 3 nights they would sign, and 10 days after that there would be a civil ceremony and photographs on the steps, and the yards would keep breathing. He could live inside a thing like that. He had lived inside worse. What he could not live inside was a room he was unable to hear. He had simply never framed it that way, because for 11 years he had not needed to. The staff moved around the table, the way staff move, which is to say, the way weather moves, without anybody looking up. A young man cleared the fish. A woman came behind him with water and filled every glass at the same steady angle, working from the far end of the table toward the head, and not one person seated there looked at her hands. Renzo did not look either. He would think about that later for a long time. Krantz set down his fork and said something quietly, sideways, to the associate on his right. It was 4 seconds of German. Renzo heard the shape of it and nothing else. He watched Krantz's face while he said it, and Krantz's face did not change at all. Vollmer smiled and turned toward the head of the table. He tells his man that the terms are a gift, Vollmer said, and that you are wise enough to take it. Renzo lifted his glass at last. The woman with the water had stopped moving. Her hand stood still above the rim of Rosaba's glass, and it stayed there 1 second longer than a hand should, and then it went on pouring. Her name was Hanne Vogler, and nobody in that room had asked for it. She had worked the Osterman's private floor for 2 years and had learned the arithmetic of being unseen. Pour from the right. Never let the bottle touch the rim. Keep your eyes level with the tablecloth and your body at the edge of the light. Guests did not want a person at their elbow. They wanted a function, and the function was to be silent and quick and gone. She was very good at it. It was the only work she had been able to get. She was also the only one in that room who had understood every word Bertold Krantz had said all evening. She had understood the part about the rolling stock and the part about the maintenance years, both of them carried over honestly, and for most of an hour she had let herself believe that she was simply serving a dinner. Then Krantz had leaned toward his associate and said, without heat, without any expression at all, that the man at the head of the table would take the poison and thank them for it. Gift. In her language, it is not a present. It is what you put in the water. And Conrad Vollmer had turned around and made it a kindness. Hanne finished pouring. She set the bottle down on the sideboard because her hands wanted something to do, and she stood against the wall with her back straight and her pulse going in her throat. And she did what 4 years had trained her to do, which was nothing. There were reasons to do nothing. She knew all of them. She had recited them so often that they came to her in order now, like a prayer she had stopped believing in and could not stop saying. She was agency staff. She could be lifted off a floor with 1 telephone call and out of the register with a second. She had no proof. She had ears, and ears are not evidence. And the man they would be weighed against had 20 years of standing beside the family whose money had paid for this room, and she had done it before. Once, in a much smaller room, in a much better coat. She had opened her mouth about a sentence that somebody wanted rendered differently. She had lost. She had gone on losing for 4 years. The dessert came out. She carried plates, because carrying gave her a reason to be near the table, and she told herself that she was only carrying plates. And she watched Vollmer's mouth make English out of German for the 4th time that night. Krantz asked about the signing. Vollmer said Friday. The offices on Halloran Street, and Krantz nodded and added one more line. And this time, Hannah heard the clause. It was a single sentence. It concerned what became of the yards if a payment was ever late. In German, it was a hand closing around a throat. In English, in Vollmer's soft and unhurried delivery, it became a scheduling matter. She set down the last plate. She counted 3, because she had learned that if she counted past 3, she would not do it at all. Then she leaned across the corner of the table to lift the empty glass at Renzo Falchieri's right hand, and she brought her mouth near enough to be heard by exactly 1 person, and she said 4 words. Your translator is lying. She heard her own voice as though it belonged to somebody standing behind her. Renzo turned his head. Conrad Vollmer was already on his feet. He was standing before Renzo had finished turning, and he was speaking to the floor manager in the doorway before anyone at that table had asked him to, and the smoothness of it was the smoothness of a man performing a fall he had not expected to need. 2 hands took Hannah by the arms, not roughly, almost politely. She did not resist. She had known how it would go from the moment she started counting. The last thing she saw was the head of the table and the man sitting at it, looking at her for the first time all night. Then the door closed, and the corridor took her, and the 4 words stayed in the room without her. Rosalba spoke first, in the voice she kept for spills. I am so sorry. She will not be on this floor again. Bertold Krantz laughed. It was a small, dry, entirely genuine laugh, and he said something in German. And Vollmer relayed that Mr. Krantz found it charming. That in Hamburg the staff were far less imaginative, and that no offense whatsoever had been taken. The table laughed with him. Ilka did not. She turned her glass by the stem and looked at the closed door. Renzo said nothing at all. She is agency, Volmer said, sitting again, arranging his napkin across his knee. They take anybody in the autumn. It happens more than you would think. There was one at the Regency last spring who informed a Dutch buyer that his wife was waiting in the lobby. He smiled. They catch a word, they believe they know, and they build a house on it. It means nothing. It was a good answer. It was a complete answer. It had arrived faster than a man should be able to assemble one, and it explained a thing that nobody had yet asked him to explain. Renzo, let it sit there. He picked up his spoon and finished a dessert he did not want. And for the remaining 40 minutes of that dinner, he watched Conrad Volmer's face every single time Bertold Krantz opened his mouth. He learned nothing. Volmer was very good. At 11:30, the Germans went up to their rooms. Rosalba took his arm in the corridor and told him that Friday was still Friday, and that she needed him to stop looking, like a man deciding something. He said he was tired. She did not believe him. She let go of his arm, and she went. Renzo found the floor manager by the service door. Quillon was a careful man, with a ledger under his arm and a lifetime of not seeing things, and he was already apologizing when Renzo asked him for the woman's name. She has been dealt with. Mr. Felcieri? That is not what I asked. Quillon opened the ledger. He turned 2 pages, and then a third, and Renzo watched his face do something that a lifetime of not seeing things had never trained it to hide. She was on the sheet at 6, Quillon said. She is not on it now. Taken off when? It does not say. She was taken off. He turned the ledger around so that Renzo could see the line, and there was no line. There was a space where a name had been, and a fresh entry written over the top of it in a hand Quillon did not recognize. The agency will hold her details. The agency did not. Tullio made the call from the car at 10 minutes past midnight, and again at 7 the next morning, and both times he was told the same thing in the same bored voice. No such placement, no such worker. The Osterman had not requested private floor staff that evening, at all. Tullio put the phone face down on the seat between them. Boss, he said, somebody scrubbed her before you thought to ask. Renzo sat in the dark of the car with his own rail yards going past the window, 400 meters of iron he had spent his life holding, and tried to picture a woman he could not describe. He had looked at her exactly once, for 2 seconds, while she was being carried out of a room. He knew 2 things about her and nothing else. She had understood every word that Bertold Krantz said. And somebody had erased her from that building before the dessert plates were cleared. Tullio found the way in by refusing to look at paper at all. Agencies are paper, he said. Basements are not. The staff floor of the Osterman lay 2 levels beneath the kitchens, past the linen presses, in a corridor that smelled of steam and floor soap and nothing else. Lockers ran the length of 1 wall. Most of them hung open, because almost nobody who worked down there owned anything worth turning a key on. Quillon walked them to hers, with the master key in his fist and a great deal of reluctance in his shoulders. The locker had already been opened, not forced. Opened and gone through, and closed again by somebody in a hurry, because the contents had been put back in the wrong order and put back at all, which is what a careful man does when he wants a thing to look untouched by anyone. Renzo took it apart himself. An apron folded into a square with the corners squared off, a pair of black work shoes with the heels worn through to the board, a paperback in German, the spine broken in one place 3/4 of the way through, as though she had opened it to the same page over and over for a long time. A tram card, a comb, no photographs, no letters, no keys. He stood there with the apron in his hands and understood that he was looking at the wrong thing. He had expected a life. Even a small life leaves residue behind it. A receipt, in a pocket, a hair clip, a note written to yourself about a shift you were afraid of forgetting. There was nothing here that said a person had walked into this corridor twice a day for 2 years. There was only equipment. Tullio said what Renzo was already thinking. Whoever had gone through this locker had not been looking for her. They had been looking for something written down, and they had not found it, and that meant it existed somewhere. Whoever she was She kept nothing where anybody could find it, and she had been keeping nothing for a very long time. And she had been extremely good at it, right up until the moment she opened her mouth at his table. Tullio lifted the folded apron off the shelf, and underneath it, lying face down, was a card. It was laminated. The lamination had gone yellow and soft at the corners from being carried. Renzo turned it over. A photograph of a younger woman, with her hair pulled back hard from her face, looking into the lens the way people look at a camera they have been told not to smile for. Beside the photograph, a registry mark, a set of dates, and 2 languages named in a formal little column. Accreditation, conference and judicial interpreter, German and English. Hannah Vogler. Renzo read the name twice. The woman who had leaned over his shoulder and been carried out of a dining room by 2 porters was not a waitress at all. She was a professional, credentialed, licensed, the kind of person governments hire when the words have to be exact. And across the whole face of the card, in letters that had been pressed hard enough to break the surface of the plastic, somebody had stamped a single word: revoked. The tram card gave them a line. The line gave them 4 stops she could plausibly have used, and Tullio spent the morning and half the afternoon walking them. He came back with an address at 4:15. Kessler Row ran east out of the Tannery Quarter, a street of shut frontages and back gates, and she lived above a laundry that had closed 6 years ago and had never quite stopped smelling of it. There was a rear stair, iron, bolted to the brick, at the top of it, a landing, and off the landing 3 doors. Hers was the 3rd, and the frame had been split at the strike plate and pushed back into shape with somebody's thumbs. Renzo did not knock. He stood in the doorway. The room had been a drying room once. There were vents in the ceiling, and a pipe along the wall that still ran warm, and that was the whole of the heating. A table, a hot plate, a window with brown paper taped over the lower half of it, and everything she owned in the world sitting open on the bed in a single canvas bag, half-packed. Hannah Vogler was kneeling beside it, with her back to him. Her right hand was bound between 2 flat slats of fruit crate and wrapped in packing tape. Badly. The way a thing gets wrapped when a person is doing it to herself with her wrong hand. She was folding a shirt with her left. She had folded it 3 times already. There was a cup of tea beside her on the boards, and it had gone cold enough to have a skin on it, and she had not touched it. She had been kneeling there a while, doing the same small task, because it was easier than deciding where to go. She did not startle. She turned her head, saw him, and went back to the shirt. "You are 3 hours later than they were," she said. Renzo stepped inside. He did not sit down. There was nowhere to sit that was not her only chair. Who came? 2 men, very polite. One of them talked, and the other one stood by the door and looked at the room, which was insulting because there is nothing in it. She pushed the shirt into the bag. "They asked me what I thought I had heard. Then they asked me who I had told. They asked that 4 times. That is the only question they came for. What did you tell them?" "That I had told nobody," which was true, because I told you. And you are not nobody, so I did not think of it as telling. She said it flatly, with no irony he could find in it. "They took my telephone. They did not take the money on the table. I would like you to notice that, because it is the only piece of evidence I have, and it is not evidence of anything a court would care about." Renzo looked at the table. There was an envelope on it. Thick sealed, addressed in a small upright hand, stamped and ready to go. He was close enough to see that the address was written out fully. Street and town and everything, the way a person writes when they have written it many times, and it matters that it arrive. He took 1 step toward it, and she was up off the floor and had her good hand flat on top of it before he had finished the step. For a moment, neither of them moved. She was not a large woman. Her face was marked along the jaw, and there was a split at the corner of her mouth that had been left to close on its own. She stood there with her broken hand held against her body, and her other hand pinning an envelope to a table, in a room a man could cross in 4 paces, looking up at him without any part of her apologizing. "That is not yours," she said. I did not ask for it. You looked at it? People look at things. Men in your line of work look at things and then things happen to them. She did not move her hand. Ask me about the deal. That is what you came for. Renzo found that he had folded his arms, which he did not remember deciding to do. Your hand, he said instead. It got caught. In what? In the door when they left. She shrugged with one shoulder. It was not deliberate. That is the truth, and I am telling it to you because I have decided I am only going to say true things to you. And some of them are going to be less useful than others. Why did you say it at all? She held his eye a beat too long, and something went across her face that he could not read, and did not come back. Ask me about the deal, she said again. Then she looked past him at the split door frame, and her voice changed for the first time since he had come in. You should not have come here yourself. You should have sent him. She nodded at Tullio on the landing. Now they will know you believed me. She talked while she packed, because packing gave her something to do with the hand that still worked. There are 2 contracts, she said. There is a German one, and there is an English one. Nobody is hiding this from you. The English one will have a line on the first page calling it a translation, provided for convenience. There is a line like that. On everything. Yes. And there is a second line, further back, which says that where the 2 texts disagree, the German text governs. She put a folded coat into the bag. That is not a trick. It is standard. It is on half the contracts in Europe. It only becomes a trick when the 2 texts disagree on purpose. Renzo said nothing. Your English text says the yards stand as security against a payment schedule, she said. The German text says the yards pass to him on a late payment. Not a defaulted payment, a late one. And the schedule that decides what late means is a delivery schedule his own side operates. She looked up. He does not have to wait for you to fail. He can make you late whenever he chooses, and the paper will already agree that the yards are his. The pipe along the wall ticked. Somewhere below them, a door closed, and someone went out into the street. Renzo had built a life on being unsurprised. He had sat across tables from men who meant him harm, and had felt his own pulse stay exactly where he had left it. What went through him now was not surprise. It was something further down and much older. The feeling of putting a foot on a stair that is not there. 14 months. 9 meetings. A man at his shoulder for 11 years. Turning every sentence of it into English. Vollmer, he said. I do not know what he was paid or when. Hannah pulled the drawstring on the bag. I know that on Tuesday, the associate at Mr. Kranz's right hand referred to him, and he did not call him the translator, and he did not call him your man. She straightened. He called him theirs. There it was. Not a suspicion, not a bad feeling in a windowless room, but a word chosen by a stranger who had no idea anyone at the table understood him. And the sentence, at the end of the meal, Renzo said. The one about the terms being a gift. For the first time, something that was almost a smile. That is the part you will not like, she said. In my language, gift is not a present. It is what you put in a person's drink. He said you would take the poison and thank them for it, and Vollmer heard that, and Vollmer turned it into a compliment, and you lifted your glass. Renzo stood very still in a room he could have crossed in 4 paces. I have no proof, she said. I want to be clear about that before you decide anything. I have no recording. I have no copy of the German text. I have my ears and a hand that got caught in a door. If you take this to your sister, she will tell you that a dismissed agency waitress is trying to sell you a story, and she will not be unreasonable to say it. Do you want money? No. Everyone wants money. I have a job I no longer have and a hand I cannot use. And I am leaving this city tonight, she said. You could offer me a great deal and it would not be worth what taking it would mean. He looked at the envelope on the table. Then who is that for? Anne Vogler picked up the bag with her left hand and did not answer him at all. Behind Renzo, from the landing, Tullio said quietly, Boss. There is a car at the end of the row. It was there when we came up. The car did not wait to be looked at twice. Tullio went down the iron stair and started along the row, and it pulled out before he had covered 30 meters. No lights. Turning east toward the water, and the long way round to the hotel district. That was not a warning, he said, when he came back up. A warning, Parks, where you can see it. That was a man going to report. Renzo turned back into the room. Get your bag, I have a train at 9. You have a splinted hand, a door that does not shut, and 2 men who know which stair you sleep at the top of. They knew that this morning, they did not know that I believed you. Hannah stood with the canvas bag hanging from her left hand and did not move. He could see her weighing it, and he could see that she had already been weighing it for hours, and that the weighing was the only thing she had left that was hers. So he did the only thing he could think of that would not be in order. He sat down in her chair. It was a bad chair. One leg had been shortened at some point by someone who had given up halfway, and it rocked, and he let it, and he put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor rather than at her. I am going to tell you something true, he said. Then you are going to tell me who that letter is for. She did not answer, and she did not put the bag down either. In the last 14 months I have signed 9 documents I could not read, Renzo said. In the last 20 years I could not begin to count them. I decided when I was 20 that a language was a cost, like haulage or insurance, and that a man in my position pays it once and forgets about it, so I bought a pair of ears. I have had them at my shoulder ever since, and I have never once asked myself what would happen on the day those ears decided to belong to somebody else. He looked up. I have been deaf in every important room I have ever walked into. You are the first person in 11 years who told me so. The bag came down onto the boards. She did not sit. She leaned back against the edge of the table, with the envelope behind her, and she looked at the taped window, and when she started talking, her voice went flat and even, the way a person talks when they have said a thing to themselves so many times that it no longer has any temperature left in it. Nearly 5 years ago I was in a criminal court, she said. I was 30. I was good at it. That is not pride. It is only the fact, because if I had been less good, it would not have mattered what I said. A witness gave his evidence in German. He was describing a man he had seen at a loading gate at night, and he used a construction that carries doubt in it. There is no clean English for it. The nearest is that it might well have been him. That is what I said. In the recess, a man came and sat next to me. He was polite. He explained that what the witness had used was colloquial hedging, that Germans hedge when they are frightened of a courtroom, and that the honest rendering in English was simply that it was him. He said I was young, and that this was the sort of nuance that comes with another 10 years. He said everybody in the room was already agreed. She stopped. The pipe ticked. I let it stand, she said. I initialed the transcript. It took me about 4 seconds, which is roughly what it takes to pour water into a glass. The man at the loading gate was called Wendell Ost. He got 9 years. Renzo did not move. A year later, I went back with the recording and asked for the interpretation to be reviewed. She said, nobody wanted it reviewed. What they wanted was for the mistake to belong to me personally and not to the process. Because a mistake that belongs to a person can be dismissed and a mistake that belongs to a process has to be undone. So I was found to have fallen below professional standards. They took the accreditation. They kept the verdict. He is still inside, she said. 4 years and 8 months. His wife works 2 jobs in a town I have never set foot in, and on the 3rd of every month a letter arrives with money in it and no name on it, because if she knew whose money it was, she would send it back and she would be right to. Renzo sat in the broken chair in a drawing room on Kessler Row and understood, finally and completely, what he had been looking at in that locker. Not a woman with no life. A woman who had spent 4 years turning everything she earned into an envelope and had kept nothing back for herself, not even a photograph, because keeping something would have meant she had decided to be forgiven. That is why I said, 4 words to a man like you, Henny said. I have already sat quietly in one room and let a lie stand. I am not able to do it a second time. It has nothing to do with courage, and you should not think that it does. Renzo stood up. Give me your hand. It is fine. It is bound with parcel tape by a woman using the wrong hand. He put his own hand out and left it there. Give me your hand. She gave him her hand. He worked the tape loose and dropped it in the corner and took the 2 slats of fruit crate and turned them until they lay along the bone rather than across it, and he wrapped it again with a roll of bandage. Tullio brought up from the car slowly, badly, having to stop twice. Tighter at the wrist, she said. Looser over the knuckles. You have made a parcel of it. I am aware. You are very confident for a man who has never done this. I have done this. Not on a hand. He tied it off. Not on anybody who talked the whole time. Something went through her face that might, in a better year, have been a laugh. Bring the bag, Renzo said. She looked at the split door frame for a moment. Then she picked the bag up and did not argue with him about it. Then Tullio came up the stair with his telephone in his hand. And his face wrong. Boss, he said. The yard office just took a call. Mr. Vollmer would like a private word with you in the morning. Rosalba lived on the top floor of a converted grain building with the river on one side and her office on the other, because she had never seen the point of traveling to work. She let him in, at midnight in a dressing gown, with a pen still in her hand, and she listened to the whole of it standing up, and she did not interrupt once. That was the worst part. Rosalba interrupted everyone. She was letting him finish because she had decided in advance how it ended. Conrad came to me at 10, she said when he stopped. Renzo went very still. He was upset. Genuinely, I think, which is worse. He said you had been asking Quion about the woman, and he wanted me to hear it from him before I heard it from anyone else. She set the pen down. Her name is Hannah Vogler. She was struck off 4 years ago for falsifying an interpretation in a criminal trial. It is a matter of public record. Conrad had it in front of him. That is not what happened. It is what the record says happened, and the record is the only thing that exists. Rosalba folded her arms. Renzo. A woman with a revoked license, dismissed from her job an hour before, tells you at your own table that your interpreter of 11 years is lying, and offers you what? Ears. Ears and a hand, she says, got caught in a door. She never asked me for anything. They never do at the start. He let the room be quiet. Then he asked the only question he had come with. Who brought Krantz to you? Rosalba opened her mouth and stopped. He watched it happen. He watched 14 months rearrange themselves behind his sister's eyes, in order, the way a column of figures rearranges when you find the error at the top rather than the bottom. Conrad mentioned that he knew of a Hamburg group looking for licensed capacity, she said slowly. He arranged the first introduction. He was in the room when it was made. So you did not find the last open door? No, she said. It was opened for me. For a moment she looked younger and much less certain, and then the lawyer came back down over her face like a shutter. It changes nothing. It is still the only deal. If we walk away from this on Friday, the yards are finished inside 2 years, and I am not going to burn 14 months of my life because a stranger heard a word at a dinner party. She looked at him. Bring me the German text and a person whose word is worth something, and I will stop the signing myself. Until then, Friday stands. And if I stop it without you, then you will have destroyed this family for a woman you looked at once, Rosalba said. And I will still be your sister the day after, and I will never let you forget it. He was at the door when she spoke again, and her voice had lost its edge. Was she really at every one of those dinners? Quilon says 22. Rosalba was silent for a while. I did not see her either, she said. Alka Krantz was in the hotel lounge at 1:30 in the morning, with a book she was not reading. She did not seem surprised to see him. She closed the book, marked the place with her thumb, and waited. And Renzo found that he could not do this the way he had done every other hard thing in his life, which was quickly and from behind. So he sat down opposite her and did it to her face. "There will be no marriage," he said. "It has nothing to do with you. I am ending the arrangement tonight, and I am telling you first because you shook my hand in a corridor and asked me to be practical, and you deserve better than to hear it in a room full of lawyers." Ilka looked at him for a long moment. "May I ask why?" "Because I have been told what is actually in the German text, and I believe it." "By whom?" "By a woman who was carried out of the room for saying so." Ilka's thumb moved on the cover of the book. "The one at the table?" "Yes." "I looked at her," Ilka said. "Afterwards. I looked at where she had been standing, because it was the only interesting thing that happened all evening, and I noticed that Conrad did not look at her at all. Not once. Not even when they took her out." She lifted her eyes. "Everybody looks. It is the only reflex nobody can train out of themselves." He kept his eyes on my father. Renzo said nothing for a moment. It was the first piece of evidence anyone had offered him that was not a word, and it was worth more to him than any of the words had been. He watched her take that. He was ready for outrage, for a telephone call to her father, for the cold civility of a woman who had just been publicly discarded. She did none of it. She put the book down on the table and pressed her fingers flat against the cover. And when she spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean in. "When my father told me about the marriage," she said, "he did not say it was for the partnership, he said it was for the security. I asked him what that meant, and he said that I would be sitting on the correct side of the table if there were ever a difficulty." She looked up. "I have thought about that sentence for 4 months, Mr. Falcieri. I have not been able to make it mean anything except one thing." Renzo sat back. "Miss Kranz," he said, "on Friday morning, I am going to need to see the German text." Ilka Kranz picked up her book again. "Then you had better not cancel anything, in public, before Friday morning," she said. "Because if my father knows that you know, the text you see will not be the text you sign." He had put her in it before he went to his sister. The yard office was a brick block at the north end of the Varick sidings, with a caretaker's flat above it, and it had been empty since the caretaker died. There was a bed, a stove, a bath with feet on it, and one long window that looked straight down the length of the yards, over the rails and the water tower and the sodium lights, all the way to the river. It was not luxury. It had never been luxury, but the door was solid. The block had one entrance, and there were 20 men on that ground at any hour of the night who worked for the Falcieri family and had done since before Renzo was born. Hannah stopped just inside the door, with her bag still in her hand. "I am not staying here. You are staying here until Friday afternoon, and then you get on any train you like, and I will not ask you which one." She looked down at the yards for a while, then she put the bag on the floor, which was the only answer he got. Dr. Amsel came at 7 in the morning, a square, unhurried woman in her 60s, who had been setting bones for the family for 20 years and had never once asked how they got broken. She put Hannah's hand on a folded towel under the window light and worked over it a good while without saying anything at all. Then she went out onto the landing and shut the door behind her, and she said the thing quietly, which was, how Renzo knew it was going to be bad. That hand was not caught in a door. Renzo waited. "A door takes the fingers," Dr. Amsel said. "It closes along a line, and it takes whatever is in the way. This is nothing like that. This is 2 small bones, and nothing else. In the one place on a hand where 2 are all you would ever need to stop somebody writing, and it was done carefully. That is not an accident, and it is not temper either. Somebody knew exactly where to stop." She pulled her glasses off and cleaned them on her sleeve. "It has been the better part of a day. It has been walked around on, packed, carried, and taped by the patient herself. I have done what can be done. She will keep the hand, and she will keep most of what it does, provided she does nothing with it for 6 weeks. She says she needs it on Friday. Then she will have a hand that aches when it rains for the rest of her life," Dr. Amsel said. "And she already knows that, because I have just told her, and she said thank you and asked me what time it was. When the doctor had gone, Renzo stood on the landing for longer than he meant to. Somebody had done it carefully, in the one place that would keep her from writing anything down, and had done it for no reason at all except to find out who she had told. And she had walked back up her own stair afterwards, and taped it herself, and folded a shirt 3 times. And when he put the question to her, she had said it got caught, because saying anything else would have been asking him for something. He went down to the office and sat with the accreditation card on the desk in front of him and had Qui on the telephone for 20 minutes, 22 dinners on the private floor in 2 years. Falchieri business, all of them. She had poured his water at 9 of them, and stood 4 feet behind his right shoulder at the rest. 22 times he had walked into a windowless room and sat at the head of a table, and talked about money in front of a woman who understood every language spoken in it, and he had never once turned his head. He thought about the paperback in her locker with the spine broken 3/4 of the way through, opened to the same page over and over across 2 years, in a corridor that smelled of steam and floor soap, and he found that he had to put the card face down on the desk and sit for a moment with his hand flat on top of it. He had a memory of a hand at the edge of his vision, filling a glass. It was not a memory at all. It was something he had built in the last day out of shame, and he knew it while he was building it, and he let himself have it anyway. He went back up at 9 and found her at the long window, with her arm in the new sling, watching a shunter push a rake of wagons down the far road. "You told me it got caught," he said. "I did. It was held down." Hannah did not turn round. "Yes. Why lie about it?" "Because if I had said it plainly, you would have been standing in my room owing me something," she said, "and men who owe things always come back to settle. And I had a train at 9, and I wanted to leave clean." She shifted her shoulder inside the sling. "Also, it is easier to say. I have said it out loud several times now, and it gets easier each time, which tells you something about me. I would rather you did not write down. Was it deliberate? Does it matter? It matters to me." She was quiet for a second. "Yes," she said. "He asked me the same question before and after, and he was not angry. That is the part I keep going back to. He was doing a job, and he wanted to be finished, and he asked in exactly the same voice, both times." At 9:30, Tullio put his head round the door. "He is downstairs, boss. Says he came early because he did not want to be seen coming." Renzo stood and put his coat on. "Where do you want him?" "Bring him up to the office," Renzo said. "And Tullio. He is to be treated exactly as he has been treated for 11 years. Coffee, the good chair, all of it." Tullio hesitated in the doorway. "You are going to sit and have coffee with him?" "I am going to sit and have coffee with him," Renzo said. "And I am going to say nothing at all, and I am going to let him talk, because a man who has already built one complete answer has usually built the next one too, and I would very much like to hear it." Tullio nodded slowly. "And if he asks about her?" "He will not ask about her," Renzo said. "That is how I will know." Conrad Vollmer took the good chair and the coffee, and he sat forward with his elbows on his knees, like a man who had come to say something difficult and had decided to say it kindly. "I want to be honest with you," he began. Renzo said nothing. "I looked into the woman Vogler." Vollmer turned the cup a quarter turn on its saucer. "I did it because I have been at your shoulder for 11 years, and I would rather be thorough and wrong than discreet and sorry. She was removed from the register 4 years ago. A criminal matter. She altered an interpretation, and a man went to prison on it. That is what the record says." "That is what the record says," Vollmer agreed. "And I have learned in this work that the record is usually the dullest version of a true thing. I do not think she is wicked. I think she is somebody who did a terrible thing once and has been looking ever since for a room where she can be the one who tells the truth." He set the cup down. "You were simply the room." It was a good answer. It was again a complete answer, and it had again arrived before anybody had asked for it. And it was also, Renzo thought, almost entirely correct, which was what made it dangerous. "There is something I want to ask of you," Volmer said. "Ask." "Let me sit the German side alone on Friday. Rienj and I have worked through the text 7 times. If you and I both sit there, and you keep looking at me the way you looked at me on Tuesday night, Krantz will read it, and he will read it as bad faith. And we will lose the license over a waitress." He smiled, tired and fond. "Give me the authority to initial the schedules on your behalf. You sign the front page. It is what we have always done, Renzo." Let that sit exactly as long as he had let the first answer sit. Then he said, "All right." Volmer blinked once. "All right. Draw it up. Bring it in the morning." Renzo stood and put out his hand, and Volmer took it, and for a second the older man held on half a beat longer than a handshake needs. "Thank you," Volmer said. "I know how this has looked." He went down the stairs and out across the yard, and Tullio watched him all the way to the gate, and then came back up and stood in the doorway. "He never asked," Tullio said. "No. 11 years he has been telling you what other people said, and a woman accuses him at your own table, and he sits in that chair for 20 minutes, and never once asks you where she is." "No," Renzo said. He did not. Because he already knew. Renzo stood at the window and watched the gate for a while after the car had gone. He was thinking about his father's funeral. Volmer had stood 2 rows back in the rain with his hat in his hands, and had come up afterwards and said in that same soft voice that whatever Renzo needed said in another language, for as long as he needed it said, he had only to ask. He had been 34 then. He had meant it. Renzo was almost certain that he had meant it, and that was the thing he could not get past, that a man could mean it for 11 years and stop meaning it on a Tuesday, and that nothing whatsoever about him would change on the outside. She could not sleep, and neither could he, and at 10 minutes to midnight they were both in the office below the flat, with the yard lights coming in orange through the window and a pot of coffee neither of them was drinking. "I want something to do," Hannah said. "You have a broken hand. I have a broken hand, and no papers, and nothing in the world to carry, and if I sit up there for another night looking at your railway, I am going to start taking the wallpaper off." She said it evenly, but her good hand was flat on the desk and pressing down. "You do not understand. I am not being brave. I am not able to be still. If I am still, I am a woman, in a room waiting to see what men decide, and I have been that once already, and it took 4 years off my life. There is nothing to read. Rosalba has the English text, and Volmer has the file. Then get me the German one." "I cannot." "Then I am useless," Hannah said, "which is the only thing I have ever actually been afraid of," and she stood up too fast. The sling caught on the arm of the chair and turned her, and Renzo was round the desk before he had decided to move, and he had her by the shoulders, and she came up against his chest hard enough that he heard the breath go out of her. Neither of them moved. He had not touched another person outside of business in 2 years. He could feel the sling between them, and the heat coming off her and the small, violent rhythm of her heart going far too fast for a woman who had merely stood up. "Let go," she said to his collar. "You will fall. I will fall later." "Let go." He let go. She sat down and put her good hand flat on the desk again and did not look at him for some time. Tullio knocked at 20 past midnight. "Boss," he said, "there is a taxi at the gate, and Miss Krantz is in it, and she says if you keep her standing in the open, she will have to explain herself over breakfast." Dill. Ilka came up the stairs in a coat over evening clothes, with her hair still pinned from dinner, and she put a document wallet down on the desk, without sitting, and without saying good evening. "I have until 2:30, she said. "It goes back in my father's case before he wakes. If it is not there, the only person it can have been is me." Then she saw Hannah, and she stopped. The 2 women looked at one another across the desk for a moment. The daughter of the house in silk and pinned hair, and the woman with the sling and the split at the corner of her mouth. "You were on my left," Ilka said. "You poured for me twice, 3 times, said Hannah. Ilka nodded slowly, as though something had been settled, and stepped back from the desk. Hannah could not hold a pen, and she could not turn a page with one hand, so Renzo turned them, and she read aloud, and he wrote. It took an hour and 40 minutes. The man who had spent 20 years buying a language sat at his own desk in his shirt sleeves and took dictation from a woman who was not allowed to work. She confirmed the clause. She confirmed the governing text. She found two smaller things nobody had mentioned, one about insurance and one about who kept the keys to the sidings, and both of them ran the same direction. Whoever built this was not greedy, she said at one point. That is what worries me. A greedy man takes the yards. This one has taken the yards. The insurance, the keys, and the right to decide when you are late, and he has made every one of them look boring. Boring is expensive. Somebody was paid properly for this. Renzo wrote it all down in a hand that got worse as the night went on. Twice he had to ask her to repeat something, and twice she did it, without a trace of impatience. And he understood while she was doing it that this was what she had been for once, in rooms with flags in them, and that she was better at it than anyone he had ever paid, and that somebody had taken it off her with a rubber stamp. And then, at 10 minutes past 2 in the morning, she stopped in the middle of a sentence. Read that back to me, she said. Renzo read it back. Hannah sat looking at the page without moving. This was not written by a German lawyer, she said. Reinsch drafted it. Reinsch did not draft this sentence. She leaned over the wallet, awkward with the sling. It is grammatical. Everything agrees. But nobody thinks in German and arrives here. The verb has been put where an English speaker would want it, and the whole thing has been built the way you would build it if you were writing the English first and then dressing it. It is a translation pretending to be an original. She looked up at him, and her face had changed completely. Somebody wrote this in English, she said, and then put it into German so that the German text would be the one that governs. That is not a negotiating position. That is a fraud. And it is a fraud you can show to a notary in about 90 seconds, because I do not have to prove what anybody meant. I only have to read 2 sentences aloud and let a German lawyer sit there and tell the room whether he wrote them. Renzo put the pen down. Whose English? He said. I have listened to that man make English out of German 22 times, said Hannah Vogler. It is his. The telephone went at 10 to 3. It was Rosalba, awake, sharp, and audibly frightened for the first time in her adult life. Kranz had moved the signing. 9 in the morning instead of 2 in the afternoon, on the grounds of a flight. And Mr. Selk had been replaced as notary at the German side's request, and then unreplaced an hour later when Rosalba objected. And she had spent 40 minutes trying to work out why anyone would burn a favor on a notary and had not been able to. Because a notary reads the text he certifies, Renzo said. Rosalba, be at Halloran Street at 8:30. He put the telephone down and looked at the clock, and then at the woman on the other side of the desk, with a sling and 6 hours to go. You are not coming, he said. I am the only person in this city who can hear it. They put your hand on a table. Yes, said Hannah. And then they wrote a sentence, and I found it. And if I am not standing in that room when it is read, there is not one person in it with the standing to say what it is. She got up slowly this time. You can put a man on the door of that flat, and I will still be at Halloran Street at 9. I would rather arrive with you. Renzo stood there a moment. Then he took his coat off the back of the chair and put it round her shoulders over the sling. Because the office was cold, and he had run out of arguments, and there was nothing else he could do with his hands. There is a condition, he said. Of course there is. If it goes wrong in that room, Tullio does not wait for me. He takes you out through the goods entrance and puts you on the first train going anywhere, and you do not come back to this city. And the letter goes on the 3rd of every month, Renzo said, for the rest of her life. Out of my hand, in your handwriting, or a copy of it, with no name on it. Whatever happens to me on Friday, that does not stop. That is the condition. Hannah Vogler stood in a cold office in a borrowed coat and said nothing for a very long time. "You should not have said that," she said at last, "because now I have something to lose in that room, and I was much better without it." The offices on Halloran Street had a boardroom on the second floor, with a long table and 14 chairs and a window onto the street. And by 5 to 9, everybody was in it. Berthold Kranz at the far end, with his hands folded. Dr. Riensch beside him with 2 identical wallets squared before him, one marked in German and one in English. Emmerich at Kranz's right shoulder. Ilka, 4 seats down, looking at nothing. Rosalba with a pen she had not uncapped. Mr. Selk, the notary, at the head of the table with the seal case open at his elbow, small, punctual, and entirely uninterested in anybody's business but his own. And Konrad Vollmer, in the chair beside Renzo's, where he had sat for 11 years, with the authority to initial on Renzo's behalf, drawn up and unsigned in front of him. Renzo let it run. It was the strangest 20 minutes of his life. He sat at a table in his own city and listened to a man he had trusted for 11 years explain, warmly and patiently, a document built to take everything he owned. And he nodded in the correct places. He let Riensch take the room through the schedules. He let Vollmer turn it into English, sentence by sentence, in that soft, unhurried voice, and he watched his sister's shoulders come down by degrees, as she heard nothing in it that alarmed her. He let Selk lay out the seal and the register, and ask whether both parties had had the text explained to them in a language they understood. "They have," said Vollmer. At 9 minutes past 9, Tullio opened the door. Hanne Vogler came in with her arm in a sling and her hair pushed back off her face and Renzo's coat over her shoulders, and she stood at the foot of the table where anybody entering a room stands when they have not been invited to sit. Konrad Vollmer's face did something very small and very fast. It lasted perhaps a quarter of a second, and it was gone before anybody else in that room had finished turning round, and Renzo saw it, because he was the only person in the room who had not looked at the door. "Mr. Falcieri," said Dr. Riensch, "who is this?" Renzo did not answer him. Hannah spoke instead, and she spoke in German, directly down the length of the table to Berthold Kranz, and she spoke for perhaps 15 seconds. Kranz's hands came apart on the tabletop. He had spent 3 days being spoken to slowly. He had spent 3 days saying whatever he liked to the man at his right hand in the comfort of a closed room. And a woman he had watched being carried out of a dining room was standing at the foot of the table, putting his own language back in front of him at full speed, and he could hear, exactly as she intended him to, that she had heard all of it. It was the first time all week that anybody had seen the man's face do anything, and the room saw it happen, and the room understood something before a word of it had been rendered, which was that the old courtesy of speaking slowly for the room had just been taken away from him. Vollmer opened his mouth to translate. "Do not," Renzo said. The silence after that was total. "Miss Kranz," Renzo said, "would you be kind enough to tell the table what she said?" Ilka did not look at her father. "She said," Ilka answered, "that she was the woman at the dinner on Tuesday, that she has read the German text, that she is going to read 2 sentences of it aloud, and that she would be grateful if Dr. Riensch would tell the room whether he wrote them." Dr. Riensch put his pen down. Vollmer moved then. He moved beautifully, without hurry, the way he did everything. "Berthold, I must apologize," he said, in English, to the room. "This woman was removed from the interpreter's register 4 years ago for falsifying evidence in a criminal trial. It is a matter of public record. She has attached herself to Mr. Falcieri since Tuesday, and I am afraid the responsibility is mine. Selk, I would ask that none of this appear on the record." "He is right," Hannah said. She did not raise her voice, and she did not look at Vollmer while she said it. "All of it is true. I was removed from the register 4 years ago. A man is in prison because of a sentence I rendered and then initialed at the bottom of a page. I have never disputed one word of it, and I am not going to begin disputing it in front of strangers." Then she did look at him. "That is exactly why I am the only person in this room who will not be careless with a sentence today. You are welcome to spend 10 minutes on my character, Mr. Vollmer. It will not alter one letter of what is printed in the fourth schedule, and Mr. Selk will still have to read it out. Bertold, Vollmer said, if you permit this, you are permitting a dismissed employee to overturn a year of work on the strength of a grudge. Bertold Krantz did not say anything at all. That silence went round the table like a draft under a door. Turn to Schedule 4, Hannah said. Nobody moved. Turn to Schedule 4, said Mr. Selk, who had a seal open in front of him and a professional life to protect, and who turned to it himself. She read the sentence in German. She read it slowly, twice. Then she said in English, that sentence is grammatical, and it is not German. The verb has been placed where an English speaker wants it. The construction is built the way it is built when the English exists first. There is a second one on the following page, which does the same thing with a relative clause. She looked at Dr. Reinsch. Doctor, did you write those two sentences? The room waited. Dr. Reinsch was 61 years old and had 30 years of practice behind him, and he sat with his hand flat on his own document and did the arithmetic that every professional in that room was already doing, which was that he could lie about it here, or he could be asked about it later, under oath, by somebody with a recording. No, he said. It went round the room without anybody having to explain it. Selk wrote 2 lines on the pad at his elbow. Rosalba turned to the schedule and looked at a sentence in a language she did not have, at the shape of it on the page. And then she looked up the table at her brother with the face of a person who has just heard a bolt go across on the wrong side of a door. Bertold Krantz said something short in German. He is telling his lawyer to be quiet, said Hannah. I heard the tone, said Renzo. Emmerich. The associate at Krantz's shoulder looked up. On Tuesday evening, at that dinner, you referred to Mr. Vollmer, Renzo said. Miss Vogler says you did not call him the translator, and you did not call him mine. Miss Krantz, if he answers, I would like it from you, and not from him. Emmerich looked at Krantz. Krantz did not look back at him, which was the whole of the answer. And everybody in the room got it at the same moment. Mr. Selk closed the seal case. I am not certifying this, he said. Not today and not with these documents. Gentlemen, I will be writing to the chamber about it this afternoon, and I would advise everybody at this table to take their own advice before then. Rosalba Falcieri stood up. She did not look at her brother. She looked down the table at Bertold Krantz, and she uncapped the pen at last and drew one long line through the front page of the English text, from the top corner to the bottom, and she put the cap back on. There is no agreement, she said. There was never an agreement. There was a 14-month introduction, and I walked into it, and I brought my brother with me. She sat down again. Her hands were shaking. You asked me for the German text and a person whose word was worth something, Renzo said quietly. You brought me both, said Rosalba. You brought me a woman with a broken hand and no license, and she was the only honest person at this table, and I am going to be a long time getting over that. Krantz rose. He buttoned his coat with great care, and at the door he stopped and looked back down the room at Renzo. And what was in his face was not fury, it was arithmetic. You should understand what you have done this morning, he said, in English, quite clearly. Say it in German, said Renzo. I will get it either way now. Krantz went out, and Emmerich went after him. And Dr. Reinsch went last, with his wallet held against his chest, like a man carrying something he had found. Ilka Krantz did not go with them. And Konrad Vollmer sat perfectly still in the chair he had occupied for 11 years, in a room that had gone quiet around him, with nobody left in it who needed anything translated. He did not get up and he did not speak. He sat with his hands flat on the table in front of him like a man waiting for a train, and Renzo understood, watching him, that he had been waiting for this since Tuesday night and possibly for a good deal longer than that. Tullio, Renzo said, take Mr. Vollmer downstairs. I will be 5 minutes. The room downstairs had a table and 2 chairs and a window with wire in the glass, and Julio stood outside the door with his back to it. Vollmer was already talking when Renzo came in. 11 years, he said. You will want to hear that they threatened me. They did not. They offered, and I took it, and I have thought about it every day since. And if you want me to tell you that I hated you the whole time, then I can do that too. But it would not be true. I do not want any of that. Renzo put a pad of paper on the table and a pen beside it. You are going to write down what you did, he said. Every meeting, every date, who paid, and what you altered. You are going to write it twice. Once in German and once in English. In your own hand, and Mr. Selk is upstairs and he is going to witness both. Vollmer looked at the pad. And then? Then you will walk out of this building, and out of this country, and you will not be stopped at the door, and you will never again be within a mile of anything with my name on it. Renzo leaned on the back of the empty chair. You have spent 11 years telling me what other men said. You are going to spend 1 hour telling me what you did. In both languages. I want it to be exact. And 1 more page, after that. Separate from the rest, and nothing to do with me. How it is done. How a man is worked on until he renders a sentence the way somebody in the room would prefer it rendered, and what is said to him, and what he is told it will cost him if he does not. You know the method, better than anybody alive. Write the method down, and if I refuse, then you walk out of that door with Kranz's people, who have just discovered that the only man alive who can describe what they commissioned is a translator with no protection, and a very great deal to say. Renzo straightened up. I am the safest room you will ever stand in again. Conrad, that is the whole of what is left between us. Conrad Vollmer picked up the pen. Will you tell me one thing, he said, without looking up. How did she hear it? I was careful. I have been careful for 14 months. She was pouring your water. Vollmer sat for a moment with the pen held above the paper. Of course she was, he said. Berthold Krantz came to the Varick Gate at 4 that afternoon, on foot, with no car and no Emmerich, which Renzo respected more than he expected to. They spoke for less than 2 minutes, standing on the weighbridge with the wagons going past behind them. You will not move freight through this city, Renzo said. Not under your name, not under a subsidiary, not chartered through a third party in Antwerp who thinks I will not read the manifest. Your daughter may come and go as she likes, for as long as she likes. You may not. Selk's letter goes to the chamber this afternoon, and my copy of Vollmer's statement goes into a lawyer's safe tonight, and it stays there and it goes nowhere, so long as we understand one another. Krantz considered the rails for a while. You are not what I was told you were, he said. I was told the same about you, said Renzo. By the same man. Krantz almost smiled. Then he walked back out through the gate, the way he had come in, and Renzo stayed on the weighbridge until he was out of sight, thinking about how near he had come to putting his name at the bottom of a page he could not read, in a room where every single person had been perfectly polite to him. Rosalba came at 6 and stood in the center of the yard office and cried for about 90 seconds, furiously, as though it were a task to be got through, and then washed her face at the sink and sat down and started talking about Rotterdam. There is a smaller group family held. They will not give us a license. They will give us capacity, and it is half of what Krantz was offering. She was already writing. It buys 3 years. I will need 3 years. Take them. I will want a translator, Rosalba said, without looking up. A real one, on our side of the table, and paid by us, and never in the room alone. Yes, said Renzo, we are agreed about that. Ilka Krantz came at 7 to say goodbye, and asked, standing in the doorway with her coat on, whether Renzo would give her a reference one day, because she was not going back into her father's business, and she was going to need somebody who would say in writing that she was honest. I will write it tonight, he said. You do not have to do it tonight. I have found that I like putting things in writing, said Renzo. And Ilka Krantz laughed once, and shook his hand in a corridor for the second time in her life, and went. At 9 o'clock, He went up the stairs and found the canvas bag standing by the door. Hannah had her back to him at the window, watching a shunter work the far road under the sodium lights, and she had taken his coat off and folded it over the chair with the sleeves squared. "There is a train at 10, she said. Renzo put down what he was carrying on the table by the door. It was the envelope, thick, sealed, addressed in a small upright hand, stamped and ready, exactly as it had stood on a table in a drawing room on Kessler Row. "You did not post it," she said. "No, it is the 3rd tomorrow. It will be there. I have people who move faster than the post." He did not move toward her. "There are 4 things. And then you can go and get your train, and I will drive you to the station myself, if you want to be sure of me." "Say them first." "There is a firm in the city that does nothing but reopen bad convictions, and they had 2 people in a room with my lawyer at 2 o'clock this afternoon. They will pull the original court recording of the Oz trial and have it independently interpreted by 2 people who have never heard of you or of me. Whatever it says, it goes in front of a court. That is paid for. It is paid for, whether you get on the train or not, and it does not require you to be grateful." Hannah did not turn round. "Second, the same firm will petition to have the revocation reviewed on the ground that the finding was made against a person to protect a process. They tell me it is slow, and they tell me it is not certain. They also tell me that nobody has ever tried it with a written statement from a working interpreter about how professional pressure is applied in a courtroom, which is the 3rd thing because Conrad Vollmer spent an hour today writing down exactly how it is applied. In 2 languages, witnessed." Her shoulders had gone very still. "Third," he said, "I sat in a windowless room 22 times with you standing 4 feet behind my right shoulder, and I never once turned my head. There is no repair for that. I am not going to insult you by offering one. I did think about what I would want, if it were me. I decided I would not want money, and I would not want an apology, because those are both things a man hands over, so that he can stop thinking about it. So I have not brought you either. And the fourth is a question, and you may say no to it. And if you say no, the first 3 still happen." She turned round then. "I bought a language when I was 20, Renzo said, "because I thought a language was a cost. It has taken me 20 years, and 1 waitress to find out that it was the only wall in this whole business I never built myself. I am not buying another one." He stopped. "I intend to learn German badly, slowly, at my age in front of people. And I would like you to teach me." Hanne Vogler stood in the middle of a caretaker's flat above a rail yard with her arm in a sling. "That is not a job," she said. "That is a rope between 2 houses." "Yes," said Renzo. "It is exactly that. I am telling you what it is, in English, in the first language you have, so that nobody has to render it for you afterwards." She looked at him for a long time. Then she crossed to the table by the door and picked up the envelope with her good hand and stood holding it. "I have never signed one of these," she said. "I know. If I sign it, she will write back and ask why." "Then you will have to answer her," said Renzo, in German. "You are the only one of us who can." Hannah set the envelope down on the table and turned it, and with her left hand, slowly, in a script that was nothing like the small upright hand on the front, she wrote her own name in the corner. She looked at it for a moment, as though somebody else had done it. Then Renzo went to the stove and came back, and put a cup of tea in her good hand, and she drank some of it, and pulled a face. "It is the same tea you had in your room. I did not drink that one either." She put it down. "Say something to me. I have not learned anything yet. You have had a whole day. Say something." Renzo Falcieri, who had run 400 meters of iron, and 6 warehouses, and the harbor end of a city, stood in a caretaker's flat, and said 3 words in German that he had written down phonetically on the back of a manifest at 4 in the morning, and he said them badly. "Ich glaube dir. I believe you." Hannah closed her eyes briefly. "The vowel is wrong," she said. "It is further forward. Here." She reached up with her left hand and put 2 fingers under his chin and tilted it, and moved her thumb a fraction along his jaw, the way a teacher does it, entirely without ceremony, and she was standing very close, and neither of them acknowledged that at all. Again, he said it again. "Better," said Hannah Vogler, and did not take her hand away. There was no vow in it, and no promise, and neither of them said one word that could have been quoted afterwards. There was only a woman standing very close to a man, correcting his mouth, because it mattered to her that he got it right. Somewhere below them, a shunter coupled up, and a rake of wagons went slowly out of the yard, and the 10 o'clock train left the station without her. He had bought a voice once, and it had nearly cost him everything he owned. He was going to learn one instead, one word at a time, from the only person who had ever told him the truth in a language he could not speak. And that is what happens when the quietest person in the room turns out to be the only one who was listening. If this one got you, do me a favor. Somewhere in your life, there is a person who does the work and holds the door and pours the water and never gets looked at. Go and look at them today. Then come back and tell me in the comments the 4 words you would say if you knew nobody would believe you. And if you want more stories where the overlooked one turns out to be holding everything together, take a second to like this video and subscribe because there is another one coming and I want you in the room for it.